When police officers stopped an elderly black man on a motorcycle for suspicious behavior, no one expected 60 soldiers in Humvees to arrive minutes later, led by a Pentagon captain. And what happened next will leave you speechless. Before we continue, hit like, share, and subscribe. The sky was gray over downtown Richmond as 67-year-old Samuel Washington rode his vintage Harley-Davidson motorcycle down Monument Avenue. It was a cold, quiet morning, and the retired colonel walked with purpose, or rather, rode with purpose. His daily 5-mile route took him past the old Confederate monuments, now replaced with tributes to civil rights leaders. Samuel adjusted his faded army cap. 30 years of military service had taught him discipline. Every morning at 0600 hours, rain or shine, he completed this route. The body remembers what the mind sometimes forgets, and his body remembered decades of early morning PT formations. From across the street, a black car sat parked near the intersection. Inside, Officer Derek Mills watched the elderly black man on the motorcycle with growing suspicion. Mills had been a Richmond PD officer for 8 years, and in his mind, something didn't add up. Why would an old man be riding around this affluent neighborhood so early? "Dispatch, this is Unit 47, Mills radioed. "I've got a suspicious individual on Monument Avenue. Elderly black male on a motorcycle appears to be casing the area." Samuel continued riding, unaware he was being watched. His eyes fixed on the road ahead, he thought about his morning routine. After the motorcycle ride, he'd grab coffee at his favorite diner, then head to the VA hospital where he volunteered with younger veterans struggling with PTSD. Officer Mills started his patrol car and began following the motorcycle. The silent observer watched the entire thing unfold, but Samuel remained focused on his ride. 3 decades of military discipline had taught him to maintain situational awareness, but this felt like any other peaceful morning. Mills accelerated past Samuel and pulled his patrol car across the motorcycle path, forcing Samuel to stop abruptly. The officer stepped out, his hand resting on his service weapon. "Hold it right there," Mills commanded. His voice sounded calm but carried an unmistakable edge of authority. Samuel stopped his motorcycle and looked up at the young officer with confusion. His eyes narrowed slightly as he tried to understand what was happening. In his 30 years of military service, including 2 combat deployments, he'd never been stopped by police for riding a motorcycle. "Good morning, officer," Samuel said respectfully. "Is there a problem?" Mills approached with his chest puffed out, clearly enjoying the power dynamic. "What are you doing in this neighborhood?" "I'm taking my morning motorcycle ride," Samuel replied, his voice steady despite growing concern. "I do this every day." "Every day?" Mills scoffed. "You live around here?" Samuel hesitated. He lived in a modest apartment across town, but he'd been taking this route for 3 years without incident. "I live in Richmond, officer. I have every right to ride my motorcycle on public streets." "Don't get smart with me," Mills snapped. His eyes narrowed further as he looked Samuel up and down. The old man was wearing worn jeans, an old army t-shirt, and that faded military cap. To Mills, he looked like exactly what he expected, someone who doesn't belong here in this upscale neighborhood. "I need to see some ID," Mills demanded. Samuel slowly reached into his back pocket and pulled out his wallet. His hands were steady, but inside, he was trembling inside. He handed over his driver's license and his military ID card. Mills barely glanced at the military ID. In his experience, lots of homeless veterans claimed military service. "Samuel Washington," he read from the driver's license. "This address is on the other side of town. What are you really doing over here?" "Officer, I explained that I'm taking my morning motorcycle ride," Samuel said, his voice remaining calm despite the storm brewing in his eyes. "I'm a retired military officer and I volunteer at the VA hospital. This is my regular route." Mills laughed coldly. "Military officer? Right. Look at you, riding around on an old motorcycle wearing clothes that have seen better days. You're probably casing houses for a robbery." The accusation hit Samuel like a physical blow. The silence that fell between them was deafening. In 30 years of military service, he'd commanded hundreds of soldiers, managed multi-million-dollar operations, and earned the respect of generals. Now he was being treated like a common criminal because of his skin color and his modest appearance. What Mills didn't know was that Samuel Washington wasn't just any retired military officer. He was a retired colonel who had served as a Pentagon liaison with security clearances that still carried weight in certain circles. His modest lifestyle was a choice. He'd dedicated his post-military life to helping other veterans rather than pursuing wealth. More importantly, Mills had no idea that their entire interaction was being watched in silence by someone with the power to change everything. From across the street, a black SUV sat with tinted windows. Inside, Captain Maria Rodriguez of the Army's Criminal Investigation Division was conducting surveillance on an entirely different matter when she witnessed the traffic stop. Rodriguez grabbed her secure phone and speed-dialed a number at Fort Lee. "Colonel Martinez, this is Rodriguez. We have a situation developing. One of our retired colonels is being harassed by local PD. Yes, sir. Samuel Washington. He's the one who helped establish our current PTSD protocols." As Samuel stood beside his motorcycle, enduring Mills' increasingly aggressive questioning, he had no idea that the simple act of taking his morning motorcycle ride was about to trigger events that would expose systematic police misconduct and lead to federal intervention. Mills was about to make the biggest mistake of his law enforcement career, and someone powerful was watching every moment unfold. Officer Mills circled Samuel like a predator, his confidence growing with each passing moment. He guided himself through what he believed was standard procedure for dealing with suspicious individuals in upscale neighborhoods. "I'm going to need you to step away from the motorcycle," Mills commanded. His voice was pure ice. "Put your hands where I can see them." Samuel complied, raising his hands slowly. His military training had taught him de-escalation tactics, but he was beginning to realize this officer had no interest in de-escalation. His lips trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the indignity of being treated like a criminal. "Turn around and place your hands on the patrol car," Mills ordered. "Officer, this is completely unnecessary," Samuel protested calmly. "I've provided my identification, and I've explained what I'm doing. I haven't committed any crime." Mills stepped forward aggressively, invading Samuel's personal space. "I'll decide what's necessary, old man. You can cooperate, or this can get difficult for you." The completely humiliating moment was witnessed by Captain Rodriguez from her surveillance position. She was already coordinating with her superior officers, but she needed to document every detail of this encounter. Her body camera was recording, and she was simultaneously live-streaming the incident to a secure Army server. Samuel turned and placed his hands on the patrol car, his dignity being stripped away one command at a time. Mills began a degrading pat-down, far more invasive than necessary for a simple motorcycle stop. "What's this?" Mills asked, pulling out Samuel's cell phone. "It's my phone, officer." Mills scrolled through Samuel's contacts, his eyes widening when he saw names with military titles and Pentagon extensions. But rather than recognizing the significance, Mills became more suspicious. "A lot of fancy contacts for someone who doesn't belong in this neighborhood," Mills sneered. "Who are you, really? Some kind of con artist?" Samuel's patience was wearing thin. The silence that fell was heavy with tension as he fought to maintain his composure. "Officer, those are my colleagues from my military career. I served 30 years in the United States Army." "Sure you did," Mills laughed coldly and calculated. "I bet you bought that military ID online. Stolen valor is a crime, you know." The accusation of stolen valor was the breaking point. Samuel's hands trembled slightly as decades of distinguished service were reduced to a lie by this arrogant young officer. His eyes locked on Mills with a look that had once commanded respect from generals and foreign dignitaries. "Officer Mills," Samuel said, reading the nameplate, "I earned every ribbon, every medal, and every rank I achieved. I suggest you verify my credentials before making accusations you cannot substantiate." Mills felt challenged by the old man's sudden shift in tone. The calculated silence designed to intimidate wasn't working anymore. Instead of backing down, Mills decided to escalate. "I'm calling for backup," Mills announced, reaching for his radio. "We might have a stolen valor case here, possibly armed and dangerous." Samuel's voice was pure ice as he responded, "Officer Mills, you are making a serious mistake. I am unarmed, I have committed no crime, and you are violating my Fourth Amendment rights." "Don't lecture me about law," Mills snapped. "I know more about police work than some old man riding around on a motorcycle." What Mills didn't realize was that Samuel Washington had also earned a law degree during his military career, specializing in military justice and constitutional law. His professional competence was being dismissed by someone with a fraction of his education and experience. Mills keyed his radio again. "Dispatch, Unit 47 requesting immediate backup at Monument Avenue and Davis Street. Suspicious individual refusing to comply, possible stolen valor, need additional units for officer safety." Samuel stood there in shock as he listened to the lies being broadcast over police radio. He was being painted as dangerous and non-compliant when he had followed every command given. Within minutes, 2 additional patrol cars arrived, their lights flashing. Officers Jackson and Thompson emerged, ready for whatever situation Mills had described. "What's the situation?" Officer Jackson asked. "Elderly black male, suspicious behavior, claims to be military, but something's not right," Mills explained. "He's got contacts in his phone that don't add up, and he's getting aggressive when questioned." Samuel watched in silence as the 3 officers discussed him as if he weren't standing right there. The completely unacceptable behavior was escalating beyond anything he could have imagined. Officer Thompson approached Samuel. "Sir, we're going to need you to empty your pockets and submit to a more thorough search." "This is harassment," Samuel stated firmly. "I have broken no laws, and you have no probable cause for this detention." "The probable cause is that you don't belong in this neighborhood," Mills shot back. "Well-dressed people don't ride around on old motorcycles at dawn unless they're up to something." The irony wasn't lost on Samuel. His modest appearance, chosen deliberately to blend in during his volunteer work with homeless veterans, was being used as evidence of criminal intent. From her position across the street, Captain Rodriguez was fired on the spot with anger as she watched the constitutional violations unfold. She had already contacted the base commander and the military police, but she needed to let this continue long enough to build an airtight case. Samuel made a decision that would change everything. He kept thinking about the young veterans he counseled, many of whom had faced similar harassment. If he could endure this injustice and expose it, maybe he could prevent it from happening to others. He didn't say anything as Officer Thompson began searching his jacket pockets. He didn't flinch when Mills made another disparaging comment about his appearance, but he was memorizing every word, every action, every violation of his rights. Colonel Samuel Washington was about to teach these officers a lesson about assumptions, respect, and the consequences of systematic police bias. The morning sun was beginning to burn through the gray clouds, and someone powerful was watching every moment unfold. Officer Mills was emboldened by power as backup arrived. 3 police cars now surrounded Samuel, their red and blue lights painting the morning scene in harsh, rotating colors. The restaurant held breath. No, the entire neighborhood held its breath as residents peered from behind curtains and blinds. "I've seen enough," Mills announced to his fellow officers, his voice cut sharp through the morning air. This individual is clearly engaged in suspicious activity, has provided questionable identification, and is being uncooperative." Samuel remained motionless with calm that came from 3 decades of military discipline. But inside, the storm brewing in his eyes was reaching hurricane force. He was watching this careful violation of every constitutional principle he had sworn to defend. Officer Jackson handcuffed Samuel's hands behind his back. The physical control and forced compliance were designed to break his dignity, but Samuel had endured far worse during his military career. What hurt most was the dignity violation happening in full view of his neighbors. "Samuel Washington, you're under arrest for loitering, suspicious behavior, and interfering with the police investigation," Mills announced, clearly enjoying his moment of power. "What investigation?" Samuel asked, his voice steady despite the circumstances. "The investigation into your suspicious activity in this neighborhood," Mills replied with a cold and calculating smirk. The circular logic would have been laughable if it weren't so dangerous. Samuel was being arrested for being investigated for being suspicious for being investigated. The Fourth Amendment violations were mounting by the minute. Captain Rodriguez watched from her surveillance position as they loaded Samuel into the back of Mills' patrol car. Her hands trembled slightly with rage, but she maintained her professional composure. The federal case she was building was becoming stronger with every passing moment. At Richmond Police Department, Samuel was processed like any common criminal. Fingerprints taken, mugshot photographed, dignity stripped piece by piece. The booking officer barely looked at his military ID when Mills tossed it onto the desk. "Claims he's some kind of military officer," Mills told the booking sergeant. "Probably stolen valor. Had a bunch of fake contacts in his phone." Sergeant Williams, a veteran himself, picked up Samuel's military ID and examined it more carefully. His expression changed as he read the details. Retired colonel, Pentagon liaison, multiple service ribbons, security clearances. "Mills," Sergeant Williams said quietly, "this looks legitimate. Are you sure about this arrest?" Mills waved dismissively. "Trust me, Sarge. I know suspicious when I see it. Old black man riding around the rich neighborhood? Come on." Williams felt uncomfortable, but didn't want to undermine a fellow officer. He completed the booking process, but he made careful note of Samuel's military credentials and the thin justification for the arrest. Samuel was placed in a holding cell, still wearing his faded Army t-shirt and jeans. The silence that fell in the cell was profound as he sat on the hard bench and contemplated the situation. In 30 years of military service, including deployments to combat zones, he had never felt more threatened than he did in this American jail cell. But Samuel Washington was not just any retired colonel. He was a man with the connections that reached to the highest levels of military and federal law enforcement. And someone powerful was watching. Multiple someones, in fact. Captain Rodriguez had already initiated what the Army called Protocol 7, the protection and vindication of military personnel subjected to civilian law enforcement harassment. Her secure phone had been buzzing with calls from Fort Lee, the Pentagon, and even the Military Police Command. By noon, Samuel's arrest had triggered a federal response that Mills couldn't have imagined in his worst nightmares. The FBI's Civil Rights Division was opening an investigation. The Army's Criminal Investigation Division was preparing to deploy. The Pentagon's Liaison Office was coordinating with the Department of Justice. Samuel's phone call from jail wasn't to a family member or lawyer. It was to Colonel Martinez at Fort Lee. "Sir, this is Colonel Washington. I need to report a significant civil rights violation by Richmond PD." Colonel Martinez was already aware of the situation through Captain Rodriguez's reports. "Samuel, we're mobilizing everything we have. This ends today." "Sir, I want this handled by the book. Full federal investigation, complete documentation, maximum consequences under the law." You have it, Colonel. The cavalry is already rolling. Back in his holding cell, Samuel smiled just barely for the first time all day. Officer Mills had no idea what he had unleashed. The systematic police bias that had targeted Samuel was about to face the full weight of federal justice. At 1400 hours, 2 p.m., unusual activity began around Richmond Police Department. Federal vehicles were positioning themselves strategically. Army Criminal Investigation Division agents were coordinating with FBI civil rights investigators. The Pentagon had activated its crisis response protocols. Officer Mills was completing paperwork when his supervisor approached with a concerned expression. "Mills, I need to ask you about the Washington arrest this morning." "What about it?" "Straightforward case. Suspicious individual, probably casing houses for robbery." "Mills, I just got a call from the FBI, and another one from Army CID, and the chief just got a call from someone at the Pentagon." Mills felt his confidence crumbling like sand. The Pentagon? Why would they care about some old man on a motorcycle? Because that old man is Colonel Samuel Washington, retired. 30 years of distinguished service, Pentagon liaison, security clearances that are apparently still active. The color drained from Mills' face. He was trembling inside as the magnitude of his mistake became clear. And Mills, there's more. They have video of the entire encounter, professional surveillance video that's already been transmitted to federal investigators. Samuel Washington's morning motorcycle ride was about to become the catalyst for systemic transformation of police accountability. But first, Officer Mills was about to learn what happens when you arrest the wrong person. The Richmond Police Department had never seen anything like it. At 1500 hours, 3 p.m., a convoy of black SUVs pulled into the department parking lot with military precision. Federal mobilization was in full effect, and Officer Mills was about to discover the true identity of the man he had arrested. Captain Rodriguez led the federal response team, her Army Criminal Investigation Division credentials prominently displayed. Behind her came FBI Special Agent Thomas Chen from the Civil Rights Division, followed by a legal team from the Pentagon's General Counsel Office. "I need to speak with your Chief of Police immediately," Rodriguez announced to the desk sergeant. "This is regarding the unlawful detention of retired Colonel Samuel Washington." Chief Robert Hayes emerged from his office, his face pale with worry. He had spent the last hour fielding calls from federal agencies he had never expected to hear from. The institutional mobilization was unlike anything in the department's history. "Captain Rodriguez, I'm Chief Hayes. I understand we have a situation." "Chief, we have a federal civil rights investigation, unlawful detention of military personnel, and constitutional violations that require immediate remediation," Rodriguez stated with military efficiency. Meanwhile, Samuel remained in his holding cell, but his situation had changed dramatically. Instead of being forgotten like most arrestees, he was now the center of a federal operation that stretched from Richmond to the Pentagon. Colonel Martinez arrived from Fort Lee with a team of military police officers. The sight of active-duty military personnel entering the police station sent shockwaves through the building. Officers who had laughed at Mills' arrest of the suspicious old man were now nervous, but determined to distance themselves from the incident. "I want Colonel Washington released immediately," Martinez commanded, "and I want every officer involved in this incident assembled for questioning." Mills stood there in shock as he was escorted to an interview room. His world was collapsing around him as he realized the magnitude of his error. The well-dressed woman, Captain Rodriguez, was asking questions that revealed the depth of federal investigation already underway. "Officer Mills," Rodriguez began, her voice carrying the authority of 20 years of military service, "are you aware that your actions this morning violated multiple federal laws?" "I was just doing my job," Mills stammered. "The guy looks suspicious." "The guy is Colonel Samuel Washington, United States Army, retired. 30 years of distinguished service, including Pentagon liaison duties, NATO assignments, and security clearances that are still active. Mills felt the blood drain from his face. His hands were shaking as he began to understand the scale of his mistake. Agent Chen took over the questioning. Officer Mills, you arrested a decorated military officer for the crime of riding a motorcycle while black in an affluent neighborhood. Is that your testimony? That's not. I couldn't have known. You couldn't have known because you didn't bother to verify his credentials, Rodriguez interjected. You saw a black man and made assumptions based on racial profiling. The interview room door opened, and Samuel Washington entered, no longer in handcuffs but accompanied by 2 Army Criminal Investigation Division agents. Mills couldn't look at him directly. Samuel sat down slowly, his dignity restored but his memory of the morning's humiliation crystal clear. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of 3 decades commanding soldiers. Officer Mills, do you know what I did for 30 years in the Army? Mills couldn't find his voice to respond. I trained soldiers in constitutional law and military justice. I advised generals on legal matters. I represented the United States Army in negotiations with foreign governments. And this morning, you treated me like a common criminal because of the color of my skin. The calculating silence that followed was broken by Captain Rodriguez. Officer Mills, you're being placed under federal investigation for civil rights violations under Title 18, Section 242 of the United States Code. The FBI will be conducting a comprehensive review of your arrest patterns and procedures. But the federal response was just beginning. Colonel Martinez had activated military protocols that would bring resources Mills had never imagined. The Pentagon machinery was mobilizing to protect one of their own and send a message about constitutional violations. Colonel Washington, Martinez said formally, the Army stands with you. Full resources, complete investigation, maximum accountability. Samuel nodded with quiet satisfaction. He had endured the humiliation for a purpose, to expose the systematic police bias that affected countless others who didn't have his connections or resources. Chief Hayes realized his department was facing an existential crisis. The federal investigation would examine not just Mills's actions, but patterns of behavior throughout the department. The institutional conspiracy to protect bad officers was about to be exposed. Chief Hayes, Agent Chen announced, the Department of Justice will be conducting a pattern and practice investigation of the Richmond Police Department. This incident appears to be symptomatic of larger systemic issues. As word of the federal response spread through the police department, officers began to understand the gravity of what had happened. Mills had not just arrested a man, he had arrested someone with the power to bring down their entire corrupt system. Samuel Washington stood up slowly, his military bearing restored. The hidden elite identity that Mills had dismissed was now fully revealed, and the consequences were about to be completely devastating for everyone involved in his unlawful arrest. The federal investigation was just beginning, but Officer Mills' career was already over. The truth behind sabotage was about to explode across social media in ways that would shock the whole room and the entire nation. Captain Rodriguez had done more than just conduct surveillance. She had live-streamed Samuel's arrest to multiple federal agencies and social media platforms simultaneously. One splash of mud on Samuel's dignity was about to become a tsunami of public outrage. From across the street, Rodriguez's hidden camera reveals everything had captured every moment of the constitutional violations in stunning 4K detail. The video began circulating at 4:00 p.m. Within 30 minutes, Colonel Samuel Washington was trending nationally. The footage showed a distinguished elderly black man being humiliated, handcuffed, and arrested for the crime of riding a motorcycle while existing in an affluent neighborhood. He was just a retired military officer taking his morning exercise, But social media transformed him into a symbol of everything wrong with American policing. The life-changing encounter begins to reshape public discourse about police accountability and racial profiling. Samuel, now released and back home, watched in silence as his morning nightmare became a national story. His phone rang constantly. Reporters, veterans organizations, civil rights groups, and military colleagues offering support. CNN picked up the story first. The headline read, "Retired Army Colonel arrested while riding motorcycle. Federal investigation launched." The accompanying video showed Mills circling Samuel like a predator, the completely humiliating moment preserved forever. MSNBC followed with, "Pentagon mobilizes after decorated veteran arrested for suspicious motorcycle riding." The segment featured interviews with military legal experts explaining the constitutional violations captured on video. Fox News, trying to defend law enforcement, ran the headline, "Police officer under investigation after arresting Army veteran," but even their conservative audience was shocked by the footage of Mills' behavior. Social media exploded with veterans sharing their own experiences with police harassment. Veterans Against Profiling became a secondary trending hashtag as thousands of service members posted stories of similar degrading treatment. The Richmond Police Department's phones rang off the hook. Protesters began gathering outside the building by evening. The silence that fell over the department was deafening as officers realized they were at the center of a national scandal. Officer Mills, who had started his day as an anonymous cop, was now being mocked by powerful voices across the political spectrum. Late-night comedians made jokes about his incompetence. Political commentators used him as an example of systematic police bias. Veterans groups called for his immediate termination. But the most powerful moment came when Samuel agreed to a live interview with Anderson Cooper. His voice sounded calm as he described the morning's events, but his words carried the weight of 30 years defending constitutional principles. "Anderson, I took an oath to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic," Samuel said, his eyes fixed on the camera. "This morning, I encountered a domestic enemy of constitutional rights wearing a police uniform." The interview went viral instantly. Samuel's dignity and articulate response to injustice inspired millions. Veterans posted videos of themselves saluting their screens. Civil rights organizations shared the clip as an example of grace under pressure. Mills, watching from his apartment, felt the walls closing in. His wife had stopped talking to him. His children were embarrassed to go to school. His neighbors avoided eye contact. The social media storm was destroying his life in real time. Richmond Mayor Patricia Davidson called an emergency press conference. She stood up abruptly at the podium, visibly shaking as she addressed the national media attention. "The actions of Officer Mills do not represent the values of Richmond or our police department," she announced. "We are cooperating fully with federal investigators and will take appropriate action based on their findings." But it was too late for damage control. The video evidence was overwhelming, and public truth revelation had already occurred. The viral exposure was beyond the department's ability to contain or spin. Pentagon spokesperson Colonel Jennifer Adams held her own press conference, flanked by American flags and military protocol. Her voice was pure ice as she addressed the media. "The United States military takes care of its own," she stated firmly. "When a decorated veteran is unlawfully detained and humiliated, it becomes a matter of national security and constitutional preservation." The message was clear. Federal protection for Samuel was non-negotiable, and maximum consequences for those responsible were guaranteed. By evening, Justice for Colonel Washington had over 2 million posts. The digital army of supporters included veterans, civil rights activists, constitutional scholars, and ordinary Americans outraged by the footage. Samuel's story had become larger than one morning's injustice. It had become a catalyst for change, a moment of reckoning for American policing, and a testament to dignity under attack. The viral explosion was just the beginning. Federal investigators were building a case that would reshape policing in Richmond and send a message to law enforcement nationwide. Officer Mills had arrested the wrong man, but more importantly, he had awakened the wrong country. The American people had seen enough, and justice was coming. The room filled with children. No, the room filled with federal investigators as the Department of Justice expanded its probe into the Richmond Police Department. What began as one officer's racist arrest had revealed systematic corruption that reached the highest levels of city government. Agent Chen led a team of 12 FBI investigators through Richmond PD's files, uncovered months of documentation that painted a disturbing picture. Officer Mills wasn't a lone wolf. He was part of a coordinated pattern of harassment targeting minorities in affluent neighborhoods. The silent observer had become multiple observers as federal surveillance revealed the true scope of police misconduct. Hidden cameras had been recording Richmond PD for weeks before Samuel's arrest as part of an ongoing civil rights investigation. Captain Rodriguez presented her findings to a packed federal courtroom. The evidence was overwhelming and damaging: systematic targeting of minorities, falsified police reports, and supervisory approval of constitutional violations. "Your Honor," Rodriguez testified, "Officer Mills' arrest of Colonel Washington was not an isolated incident. Our investigation has uncovered 47 similar cases in the past 18 months alone." The federal prosecutors had built an airtight case using surveillance footage, communications intercepts, and whistleblower testimony from inside the police department. The institutional conspiracy was being exposed piece by piece. Samuel sat in the courtroom gallery, his military bearing intact as he watched justice unfold. He had endured the humiliation to expose this corruption, and now the systematic transformation was beginning. Police Chief Hayes was called to testify under oath. His hands were shaken as he faced questions about his knowledge of discriminatory practices within his department. "Chief Hayes," the federal prosecutor began, "were you aware that Officer Mills had received 17 complaints about racial profiling in the past 2 years?" Hayes couldn't meet the prosecutor's eyes. "I was aware of some complaints, but they were investigated internally and found to be unsubstantiated." "Unsubstantiated or covered up?" the prosecutor pressed. The calculated silence that followed spoke volumes. Hayes's carefully constructed lies were crumbling under federal scrutiny. Captain Rodriguez had documented everything: internal affairs investigations that were buried, complaints that disappeared, and a systematic pattern of protecting bad officers while silencing their victims. Samuel's arrest had triggered a federal response that exposed corruption reaching into City Hall. Mayor Davidson had been aware of the police department's problems but had chosen political expediency over constitutional rights. The federal investigation revealed that Richmond PD had been receiving federal grants while simultaneously violating the civil rights those grants were meant to protect. The fraud and corruption charges were mounting daily. Officer Jackson and Officer Thompson, who had assisted in Samuel's arrest, were now cooperating with federal investigators to save their own careers. Their testimony revealed the toxic culture within the department. "Mills told us the old man was probably casing houses," Jackson testified. "We just went along with it because that's how things work in our department. You back up your fellow officers, no questions asked." The blue wall of silence was crumbling as officers realized their careers and freedom were at stake. The federal pressure was unlike anything they had experienced. Samuel watched the proceedings with quiet satisfaction. His sacrifice was producing the systemic change needed to protect future victims. The federal machinery was working exactly as the Constitution intended. Colonel Martinez testified about the military's perspective on Samuel's arrest. His voice carried authority as he explained the broader implications. "Colonel Washington represents the best of American military service," Martinez stated. His unlawful detention is not just an attack on him personally, but on the constitutional values he spent 30 years defending. The federal judge, the Honorable Patricia Williams, was a former Army JAG officer herself. She understood the significance of targeting a retired military officer and the message it sent about American values. This court will not tolerate the systematic violation of constitutional rights, Judge Williams declared. The evidence presented shows a pattern of behavior that strikes at the heart of equal justice under law. The federal investigation had grown beyond Richmond. The Department of Justice announced a nationwide review of police departments with similar patterns of discrimination. Samuel's arrest had become the catalyst for a national reckoning. Public pressure continued to mount as veterans organizations, civil rights groups, and military leaders demanded maximum accountability. The viral video of Samuel's arrest had been viewed over 50 million times, making it impossible for authorities to ignore. Mills, meanwhile, had been suspended without pay and was facing federal criminal charges. His world was collapsing as he realized the true cost of his racist assumptions and abuse of power. The institutional conspiracy that had protected officers like Mills for decades was being systematically dismantled by federal prosecutors who had unlimited resources and unwavering determination. Samuel Washington's morning motorcycle ride had exposed a cancer within American law enforcement, and the federal treatment was aggressive, comprehensive, and absolutely necessary. The federal courthouse buzzed with tension as United States v. Derrick Mills and Richmond Police Department entered its critical phase. The courtroom held its breath as Samuel Washington took the witness stand, his military bearing commanding respect from everyone present. Federal prosecutor Sarah Martinez, no relation to Colonel Martinez, had built a devastating case using the surveillance footage, documented patterns of discrimination, and Samuel's own powerful testimony. "Colonel Washington," Prosecutor Martinez began, "please tell the court about your 30 years of military service." Samuel's voice was steady and clear as he recounted his distinguished career. Pentagon liaison, NATO assignments, security clearances, commendations for excellence, and leadership of thousands of soldiers. His professional credentials were impeccable and impossible to dismiss. Defense attorney Robert Clayton, representing Mills and the police department, attempted to minimize the significance of the arrest. But he was facing a legal expert who understood constitutional law better than most lawyers. "Colonel Washington," Clayton began his cross-examination, "isn't it true that you were in an affluent neighborhood where you didn't live?" Samuel's eyes narrowed slightly, but his response was measured and professional. "Counselor, are you suggesting that American citizens need permission to use public streets based on their zip code?" The sharp legal expertise in Samuel's response caught Clayton off guard. This wasn't some confused victim. This was a military lawyer who understood the Constitution better than the defense attorney. "Colonel Washington," Clayton continued, "Officer Mills was simply investigating suspicious behavior." Samuel's response was devastating in its precision. "Counselor, under Terry v. Ohio, reasonable suspicion requires specific and articulable facts indicating criminal activity." Officer Mills testified under oath that his suspicion was based on my race, my modest appearance, and my presence in an affluent neighborhood. That is the textbook definition of racial profiling and violates the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. The courtroom fell silent as Samuel's legal knowledge demolished the defense's arguments. His expertise was on full display, and Clayton realized he was facing an opponent who understood the law better than he did. Judge Williams leaned forward, clearly impressed by Samuel's legal acumen. "Colonel Washington, did you practice law during your military career?" "Yes, Your Honor. I earned my Juris Doctor from Georgetown University Law Center while serving, and I specialized in military justice and constitutional law. I advised commanding generals on legal matters and taught constitutional law at the Army War College." The revelation sent shockwaves through the courtroom. Mills had not only arrested a decorated military officer, he had arrested a legal expert who understood civil rights law better than most federal judges. Defense attorney Clayton visibly deflated as he realized the magnitude of his challenge. His client had targeted someone with the legal expertise to destroy their entire defense strategy. Captain Rodriguez, called as the government's key witness, presented the surveillance evidence with military precision. Her testimony was methodical and devastating, documenting every constitutional violation captured on video. "Captain Rodriguez," Prosecutor Martinez asked, "in your professional opinion as a federal investigator, was Colonel Washington's arrest justified?" "Absolutely not," Rodriguez replied firmly. Her voice carried authority as she continued, "This was racial profiling, period. Officer Mills saw a black man in an affluent neighborhood and manufactured probable cause to justify harassment and arrest." The defense's attempts to justify Mills' actions crumbled under scrutiny. Every argument was systematically demolished by witnesses who understood both law and military justice. Samuel's expert testimony continued as he explained the broader implications of his arrest. His legal analysis was comprehensive and damning. "Your Honor, Officer Mills' actions violated multiple federal statutes. Title 18, Section 242 criminalizes the willful deprivation of constitutional rights under color of law. The Fourth Amendment prohibits unreasonable searches and seizures. The 14th Amendment guarantees equal protection under law." Judge Williams was taking detailed notes as Samuel spoke. His legal expertise was transforming the proceedings from a simple civil rights case into a constitutional law seminar. "Furthermore," Samuel continued, "the systematic nature of these violations, as documented by federal investigators, constitutes a pattern and practice of constitutional violations that requires comprehensive federal intervention." The federal jurisdiction was clear, and Samuel's legal arguments were unassailable. Clayton's defense strategy was falling apart in real time. Mills sat at the defense table, watching his career end as the man he had humiliated systematically destroyed his legal position. The racist assumptions that had driven his actions were being exposed and condemned by someone with superior legal knowledge. Colonel Martinez testified about the military's response to Samuel's arrest. His testimony emphasized the institutional significance of targeting military veterans and the federal government's commitment to protecting their rights. "Colonel Washington represents the highest ideals of military service," Martinez stated. "His unlawful detention is an attack on every service member who has sworn to defend the Constitution." The federal response had been swift and comprehensive, because Samuel was not just any victim. He was a legal expert with the knowledge and connections to ensure maximum accountability. As the courtroom proceedings continued, it became clear that Mills had made the worst possible mistake. He had targeted someone with the legal expertise, military connections, and federal relationships necessary to expose systematic corruption and demand constitutional accountability. Samuel's quiet competence and legal mastery were vindicating every victim of police misconduct who lacked his resources and knowledge. His expert testimony was building precedent that would protect future victims. The federal courthouse had become the battleground where constitutional principles would triumph over racist policing, and Samuel Washington was leading the charge with legal precision and military discipline. Justice was coming, and it would be thorough, comprehensive, and absolutely devastating for those who had violated their oaths to serve and protect. The federal investigation had grown into something unprecedented in Richmond's history. FBI agent Chen's team had uncovered a web of corruption that reached every level of city government, from patrol officers to the mayor's office. Samuel sat in the federal briefing room, now serving as a key consultant to the investigation. His legal expertise and military experience made him invaluable to prosecutors building their case. "Colonel Washington," Agent Chen began, "your arrest was just the tip of the iceberg. We've documented systematic violations affecting hundreds of citizens over the past 5 years. The evidence was overwhelming. Hidden surveillance had captured Richmond PD officers engaging in racial profiling, evidence tampering, and coordinated harassment of minority communities. Samuel's case had opened the floodgates to federal scrutiny. Captain Rodriguez presented her comprehensive findings to the federal task force. The institutional conspiracy was deeper and more systematic than anyone had imagined. We have documented 47 cases similar to Colonel Washington's arrest," Rodriguez reported. "Systematic targeting of minorities in affluent neighborhoods, falsified police reports, and supervisory approval of constitutional violations." The federal machinery was operating at full capacity. The Department of Justice had assigned 23 federal prosecutors to the Richmond case. The FBI had deployed surveillance teams, forensic accountants, and civil rights specialists. Samuel's morning motorcycle ride had triggered a response that was reshaping federal law enforcement priorities. The Pentagon had issued new protocols for protecting military veterans from civilian law enforcement harassment. Mills, meanwhile, was discovering the cost of his racist assumptions. The federal criminal charges included deprivation of rights under color of law, conspiracy to violate civil rights, and obstruction of justice. Each charge carried potential prison time. The federal investigation revealed that Mills had been protected by supervisors who shared his racist attitudes. Internal affairs complaints had been buried systematically, and officers who reported misconduct had been retaliated against. Sergeant Williams, who had tried to warn Mills about Samuel's military credentials, became a key federal witness. His testimony revealed the toxic culture within Richmond PD. "I knew Colonel Washington's arrest was wrong," Williams testified, "but speaking up against another officer was career suicide in our department. The code of silence was absolute." The federal prosecutors were building multiple cases simultaneously. Mills faced individual charges, while the department faced pattern and practice violations that could result in federal oversight for decades. Samuel watched the proceedings with quiet satisfaction. His sacrifice was producing systemic change that would protect future victims. The federal response was exactly what the Constitution required. Judge Williams had expanded federal jurisdiction to include the entire Richmond Police Department. The comprehensive investigation was uncovering corruption that had been hidden for years. Mayor Davidson found herself under federal investigation for her role in covering up police misconduct. Her political career was ending as federal prosecutors examined her administration's complicity. The public pressure continued to mount as veterans' organizations demanded maximum accountability. Samuel had become a symbol of dignity under attack and constitutional principles under siege. Congressional hearings were announced to examine nationwide patterns of police harassment targeting military veterans. Samuel's case had elevated the issue to national prominence. The viral video of his arrest had been viewed worldwide, making Richmond PD a symbol of American police misconduct. The international embarrassment was adding pressure for comprehensive reform. Samuel's legal expertise was proving invaluable to federal prosecutors. His knowledge of constitutional law and military justice helped them build airtight cases against every officer involved. "Colonel Washington," Prosecutor Martinez said during case preparation, "your legal analysis has been instrumental in strengthening our prosecution. Your expertise is ensuring justice for every victim." The federal investigation had revealed systematic corruption that shocked experienced prosecutors. The institutional conspiracy to violate civil rights was deeper and more organized than they had ever encountered. Mills was learning that targeting the wrong person could destroy not just careers, but entire institutions. His racist arrest had triggered federal intervention that was dismantling the corrupt system he had helped maintain. Samuel Washington's morning motorcycle ride had become the catalyst for federal justice and systematic transformation of American policing. The constitutional principles he had defended in uniform were now being vindicated in federal court. The federal courthouse was packed beyond capacity as Judge Williams prepared to deliver sentences that would send shockwaves through law enforcement nationwide. Samuel sat in the front row, his military bearing a stark contrast to the defeated officers awaiting their fate. The moment of reckoning had arrived. Mills stood before the bench, visibly shaken as he faced the consequences of his racist assumptions and constitutional violations. "Derek Mills," Judge Williams began, her voice carrying the weight of federal authority, "you have been found guilty of deprivation of rights under color of law, conspiracy to violate civil rights, and obstruction of justice." The courtroom held its breath as the judge continued. Her words would define the standard for police accountability across the nation. "Your actions against Colonel Washington were not those of a law enforcement officer serving his community. They were the actions of someone who violated his oath, betrayed public trust, and attacked the very Constitution he swore to protect." Mills could barely stand as the weight of his crimes was laid bare before national media and his former colleagues. His career was over, his reputation destroyed, and his freedom about to be taken away. "I sentence you to 5 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. You're permanently barred from law enforcement and will pay full restitution to Colonel Washington for damages and legal fees." The maximum sentence sent a clear message. Racist policing would face federal consequences that would destroy careers and end freedoms. Chief Hayes faced his own judgment. The federal investigation had revealed his complicity in covering up systematic misconduct and protecting corrupt officers. "Robert Hayes," Judge Williams continued, "as chief of police, you had a duty to ensure constitutional policing. Instead, you enabled systematic violations and covered up misconduct. You are sentenced to 3 years in federal prison and permanent disbarment from law enforcement leadership." Captain Rodriguez watched from the gallery as justice was finally served. Her federal investigation had exposed the corruption and delivered accountability that local authorities had refused to provide. Officer Jackson and Thompson, who had cooperated with federal investigators, received lighter sentences but still faced career destruction. Their cooperation had helped expose the systematic nature of the violations, but participation in constitutional violations carried inevitable consequences. The Richmond Police Department faced federal oversight that would transform its operations for decades to come. The pattern and practice violations had triggered DOJ intervention that would reshape policing throughout the region. Samuel stood to address the court during the victim impact phase. His words would define the meaning of his sacrifice and the importance of constitutional accountability. "Your Honor," Samuel began, his voice steady and filled with authority, 30 years ago, I raised my right hand and swore an oath to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic." The courtroom was silent as Samuel's powerful words resonated with moral authority earned through decades of service. Officer Mills became a domestic enemy of constitutional rights when he targeted me based on racial prejudice and abuse of power. His actions violated everything I spent 3 decades defending. Samuel's impact statement was carried live on national television, reaching millions of Americans who had followed his story since the viral video of his arrest. But this case is bigger than my personal experience. It's about ensuring that every American citizen can exercise their constitutional rights without fear of harassment by those sworn to protect them. The federal sentences were unprecedented in their severity, reflecting the national attention and systematic nature of the violations. The DOJ was sending a message that constitutional violations would face maximum consequences. Mills was led away in handcuffs, his transformation from arrogant officer to federal prisoner complete. The man who had humiliated Samuel was now experiencing ultimate humiliation himself. Mayor Davidson faced her own federal charges and political destruction. The cover-up she had orchestrated was exposed, and her career in public service was permanently ended. Samuel watched the proceedings with quiet satisfaction. His morning motorcycle ride had triggered federal justice that would protect countless future victims from similar harassment. The federal intervention had achieved everything Samuel had hoped for: maximum accountability, systematic reform, and clear precedent that racist policing would face devastating consequences. Justice had been served, careers had been destroyed, and the constitutional principles Samuel had defended in uniform were now vindicated in federal court. 6 months after Samuel's arrest, the transformation was complete and comprehensive. The federal intervention had reshaped not just Richmond PD, but police accountability across the entire nation. Samuel stood at the podium of the congressional hearing room, about to address the House Judiciary Committee on nationwide police reform. "Chairman Nadler, distinguished members of Congress," Samuel began, his voice carrying the authority of 30 years of military service and 6 months of federal vindication. "My morning motorcycle ride became a catalyst for change that protects every American's constitutional rights." The congressional hearing was broadcast live to millions of viewers who had followed Samuel's journey from humiliated arrestee to national hero. His story had inspired legislation that would revolutionize police accountability. The Samuel Washington Civil Rights Protection Act was moving through Congress with bipartisan support. The legislation would mandate federal oversight of police departments with patterns of constitutional violations and establish maximum penalties for civil rights crimes. Captain Rodriguez, now promoted to colonel, testified about the ongoing federal monitoring of Richmond PD. The systematic changes were producing measurable results in community relations and constitutional compliance. "The Richmond Police Department has undergone complete transformation," Rodriguez reported. "Federal oversight has eliminated discriminatory practices, retrained all personnel, and established accountability measures that ensure constitutional policing." Samuel's legal expertise had proven invaluable in crafting the reforms. His recommendations were incorporated into federal guidelines that would govern police departments nationwide. Mills, serving his federal sentence, had become a cautionary tale told in police academies across the country. His racist arrest of Samuel was studied as an example of how prejudice and assumptions could destroy careers and trigger federal intervention. The Richmond Police Department was unrecognizable from its corrupt predecessor. New leadership, federal training, and community oversight had created a model of constitutional policing that other departments were required to emulate. Samuel had returned to his daily motorcycle rides, but now he was accompanied by community supporters and protected by federal monitoring. His simple act of exercising constitutional rights had become a symbol of American democracy's resilience. The Pentagon had established the Colonel Samuel Washington Veterans Protection Program, providing federal resources to investigate harassment of military personnel by civilian law enforcement. His case had elevated veteran protection to national security priority. Mayor Davidson's replacement, elected on a reform platform, had implemented comprehensive changes in city government. The culture of corruption that had protected police misconduct was systematically eliminated through federal oversight and community engagement. Samuel's impact extended globally as international observers studied the American response to police misconduct. His case had demonstrated that constitutional principles could triumph over systematic oppression when federal institutions functioned as designed. The viral video of his arrest, now viewed over 100 million times, had become a teaching tool in law schools, police academies, and civil rights training programs. His dignity under attack had inspired millions to demand accountability from law enforcement. Colonel Martinez, now serving as Pentagon liaison for the Veterans Protection Program, reported to Congress on the nationwide impact of Samuel's case. Colonel Washington's sacrifice has protected thousands of veterans from similar harassment, Martinez testified. The federal protocols established following his arrest have prevented countless constitutional violations and ensured that military service receives the respect it deserves. Samuel concluded his congressional testimony with words that would define his legacy and inspire future generations of civil rights advocates. My arrest was intended to humiliate and silence me. Instead, it triggered a federal response that has transformed American policing and strengthened constitutional protections for every citizen. The standing ovation that followed was broadcast live to millions of Americans who had witnessed his journey from victim to vindicator of constitutional rights. Samuel Washington's morning motorcycle ride had become the most important civil rights victory of the 21st century. His quiet dignity, legal expertise, and federal connections had dismantled systematic corruption and established precedent that would protect Americans for generations to come. The transformation was complete. Racist officers were imprisoned, corrupt systems were reformed, and constitutional principles were vindicated. Samuel had achieved the ultimate victory. Justice served and America transformed. His story would inspire future generations to stand up for constitutional rights, demand accountability from public servants, and never surrender in the face of injustice. Colonel Samuel Washington had won the war for American civil rights, one motorcycle ride at a time. This story represents the triumph of constitutional principles over systematic oppression, demonstrating how one person's courage and expertise can transform an entire nation's approach to justice and accountability.